We've got a Now Bam article. It's actually Realtor.com Now Bam put together a new survey of what today's buyers think of the American dream. And now, so we're considered, I guess, I look at myself not as an elder millennial, but technically based off of our age, we're the same age. Um, we're elder millennials.
We're very old
Oh,
millennials.
very old millennials. Did you ever consider, did you ever have it on your radar or use the term, I can't wait to own a home, it's the American dream? Was that an aspiration of yours growing up?
Well, I never really equated it with the American dream.
Right, that's kind of what I'm asking, yeah.
I did buy a house pretty young. I mean, I was a little bit of an anomaly. I bought a house before most of my friends did. I think I was 25 when I bought my first house, so that was unusual. But I just kind of got the real estate bug when I was right after college.
So for you, it was more of like the industry, the business, the real estate, not as much the American dream.
Yeah, well, it was also, I mean, it was about making money too. I mean, I was actually living in Costa Rica for a year right after I got out of college, and I was not making very much money when I was down there. I was like, kind of a beach bum surfer kind of guy. And I saw all these people coming and buying and selling real estate in Costa Rica, and they were making money. And actually, I started reading some books about it because I didn't really know what I wanted to do with my life. And thanks to my mom, she sent me this great book. It's a great book called Automatic Millionaire by David Bach.
I never heard of it.
And there was several chapters in this book that just said like, hey, if you want to have some money someday, buying a home is one of the most important things to do. And it goes on to explain why, homes go up in value, you pay the mortgage down, and all those reasons. And so I just got in my head, all right, I'm going to buy some real estate.
Yeah.
Like I read this guy's book and I was like, yeah, this sounds like a good plan. Let's do this. So, and I think, even the folks that don't call it the American dream, eventually people come around to it also. I think like older generations, they had kids younger, they kind of settled down sooner. So I think, with the older generations, there's kind of this idea of like, getting the house with the white picket fence and the dog and kind of the American dream. I don't know. In my generation, I don't feel like nobody was ever talking about the American dream
Right.
with that language.
Right.
But I think, even the people that went off and they lived in the city and they did all these fun things, like eventually, when you get into your 30s, you're like, okay, maybe like get married, having some kids, getting a house, getting a dog, all these things start to become a little bit more appealing. And if you're paying rent every month, I talk to people every day that pay rent, and it gets old.
It gets old. It gets old quick, right? Yeah, I used to kind of be in that realm where I was like, I don't mind renting. I don't have to take care of anything. But we bought. I waited. I was 35 when we bought our house, so I was a little bit of a later buyer. But yeah, that's right when like rents really started to go up. We're talking 7-8 years ago now. So I do understand. Like I kind of got lucky, I guess I would say. Like I knew I always wanted to own a home, but I wanted to wait as long as possible because homeownership is responsibility. So it is kind of like that next level. But would you be surprised to know that 75% of Americans view homeownership as part of the American dream, but only 59% of them believe it's achievable?
That doesn't really surprise me. That tracks with probably what I would have expected.
That tracks pretty much,
Yeah.
This is a survey from Realtor.com, as we mentioned. Generations agree homeownership matters, but the views vary. While the majority of Americans value homeownership, older generations hold this belief more firmly. The baby boomers, 84% of them included homeownership in the American dream. And to your point, right? They grew up in a much different time. They went through the Great Depression. They went through Vietnam. They went through all these things where the idea of owning a home meant you kind of made it. Like that used to be what it like this vision was, right? Like I bought a house, even though I'm paying a 12% interest rate. It's like our family got our first house, and then the family got their first TV, right? So that's where the baby boomers
Yeah.
came
Well, you think
from.
about the baby boomers' parents was
Right.
like the World War II generation,
So living in apartments in New York, like you mentioned.
Well, all those 18-year-old kids that went off to fight in the war, and then they came home, and then you had the GI Bill, and they built all these houses for all these soldiers that came back, and just I think they were really relieved that the war was over, and that they get to just
They were home.
live their life and buy a home, and that was very satisfying. And so I think the parents of the baby boomers kind of relayed that message
The
of
silent generation.
the
Yeah.
joy of home ownership for that generation, I think was really significant. And that was kind of like the birth of the suburbs in the
Yep.
1950s too,
Yep.
Um,
Yeah, that's when everything
so
was
many
getting
neighborhoods were built in the 50s and 60s.
yeah, everything
And
was getting built in that time,
yeah,
right?
so the baby boomers, they were kids when all that was going on. They were growing up in that environment. So, it's interesting too, um the movement of people that like want to like live in vans and be mobile
Right.
with this whole COVID remote work environment that we're in also is kind of an interesting phenomenon. Like my family, my wife and my kids, we really like to go camping, and we have an RV. And one of my coworkers said, like, that's, and she's an older generation than I am, and she said, the really interesting thing about your generation is that you value experiences.
Right.
And I thought that was an interesting observation, and I do. I mean, I would rather go somewhere and do something interesting
Yep.
than have some shiny object,
Right.
sitting in my house.
Yeah, so
Um,
life is more about the experience of it. But it's I guess that's a great way to look at it is each generation, their experience to your point, coming back after the war and like wanting to have that home and to say like, okay, we defended our country. Now we get to settle down. We get to own a home and like raise a family here and build that life together. Where now we have more opportunities. It's easier for us to get out and to explore. You took the family on a camping trip last month, right? Pretty much
yep.
a little scary, but you're able to do that now, right? You've kind of created that experiential life versus that shiny object life.
Yeah, and we kind of thought about buying. I mean, I guess we thought about maybe buying a second home, but we didn't want to be tied down. We like going to Maine. We like
Yep.
going to Vermont, and so we're like, all right, we'll get a camper. That way, we can go wherever we want. So,
Love it.
I mean, I think in that regard, maybe my generation's a little different than some of the older generations that kind of like to be in one spot. I
Right.
don't know.
Yeah, I agree with that because like our next demographic here, the Gen Xers, right? So they're children of the baby boomers. 74% of them agree that home ownership was the American dream. That was kind of instilled in them. And then Gen X just went and kind of disrupted everything, right? They kind of shook up the whole landscape of what people thought, what people did, how people, reacted to things. I think Gen X was one of the greatest generations in my life, in my opinion. I'm sorry, um, just because they were committed to breaking the mold, and they didn't break the mold, but they were committed to doing things the way that they wanted to do things, and that's where I kind of relate to that because I have older siblings. My
Hmm.
sister's 8 years older than me. My brother's 9 years older than me. So, they're true Gen Xers. Where I'm 82. I'm right on the cusp.
What do you think of? What do you think of the Gen Xers? It's like the Nirvana, like Kurt
Yeah,
Cobain,
yeah,
kind of
yeah.
like.
Kurt Cobain.
Like I was like a little too young for the whole Kurt Cobain situation, but I feel like that was part of it. I don't
Yeah,
know.
no, Nirvana, 91, 92. I mean, I
Yeah,
was listening to Nevermind. I probably
yeah,
shouldn't have been. But yeah, like think about everything that happened from like the late 80s to the mid 90s,
yeah,
right? Those were the Gen Xers.
yeah. There was a lot of flannel in those
A
days. I
lot of
don't know.
flannel, a lot of ripped jeans. Yeah. Some tie dye. But anyway, so millennials, 69% of them feel similarly. So they don't agree. So 74% of Gen X agrees. 69% feel similarly. And this is where the millennials, our generation, technically, we're like, kind of agree, kind of not agree. I might be okay with a smaller house, but a nice big RV that I can travel the country with, right? I don't,
Yeah,
right?
that's
Or maybe I
interesting.
own a condo and I have a motor home that I drive around with.
Yeah, I feel like when I was a kid, a lot of families were striving for like the big house.
You're right.
Like my parents' generation, which I guess was the baby boomers. My parents are like young boomers, I guess.
Yep.
Um, I felt like a lot of people wanted a big house, but I don't feel like that's as much popular as it was when I was a kid. I mean, I feel like most of my friends are not trying to get big houses. They're a
No,
lot of us
they
prefer to have a smaller house and
practicality.
and spend the money on, going on vacation,
Yep.
rather than have a big house.
Yep. So 61% of Gen Z believe in its importance. Again, so not committed to it, not part of their American dream, but they believe it's important, home ownership. So it's interesting just to kind of see. But I'm with you. I mean, we bought small so that we'd have the flexibility to be able to do whatever we want, and not have to be house poor, right? So it's interesting to see how each generation kind of breaks it down, and also how the experiences that they went through lead to that dream, the American dream of home ownership. So